everybody. I thought it was about time I gave you another short tour of what's happening and not happening in my garden. Our hot, dry weather continues. Dry in the sense that we aren't getting any rain. Very humid. The last several nights we've had thick fog, and then it clears off like it has right now, and it is hot and humid. I don't know, it's probably only about 27, 28 degrees, but with the humidity it certainly feels much hotter. And we just cannot seem to get rain. We had rain forecast a few days ago, and we got a wet day. It drizzled off and on, and we had one or two brief showers. The sun came out, and an hour later the ground was dry again. It's really, well, I'm tempted to say unusual summer, but for some reason this seems to be our new normal. This is either the third or the fourth year. We've got very little rain in July, and August is coming. The last 2 or 3 years we've had no rain in August either. I don't see any reason for this to change immediately. So I want to show you some of the things that are going on, some things that recovered after all of the cold weather, other things that are alive but were really stunted by that cold weather that we had in early June, the first 2 weeks of June. Most unusually cold here. I've never got really hit before by, well, we didn't get frost this time, but I always start planting out in the fourth week of May, and never had any problem with it before. But this year a lot of things just didn't, well, they didn't die, we didn't get frost, but it stunted them, and some things just haven't recovered. I think another year I won't be so anxious to put anything in the garden before mid-June. So let's have a look around here at a few things. Start off at my corn cage, a dog kennel that was never used for a dog that I grow corn in, because if I didn't, I'd never get any. The raccoons would get it all. Well, the tallest plants at the very back there, probably including the height of that tassel, are getting close to 3 feet, 2.5 feet tall, something like that. But I've never had corn that was that short start developing its tassels before. And some of the ones in the foreground here aren't much over a foot, 1.5 feet tall, and they've got their tassel. I don't see any ears developing yet, but that usually follows right after you see the tassels. So I don't know. Miniature corn plants, maybe I'll get miniature corn. The hay has worked quite well. Things are looking a bit knocked over in there because I just came out of there a short time ago, trying not to step on any of the corn plants, but pulling up some of the weeds that had come up through the hay. Most of the weeds were oats. I guess it's oat straw. I'm calling it hay. It's straw, and the seeds in there have germinated. That is what the corn looks like. I think that cold weather really stunted it. I had already started them as seedlings in the hoop house, but then when I brought them outside, we got that 2 weeks of unnaturally cold nights. So that's what happens to corn, I guess, if they go through the cold spell. Well, that's not all of my cherry crop, but it's not far from it. I've been picking a few different times I've been out here walking around. They're not a sweet cherry. Sweet cherries just won't grow in this climate. They won't survive our winter at all. But after you've eaten 2 or 3 of them in a row, they seem to taste quite sweet. You just have to get used to the sourness, I guess. But they would be a good pie cherry, or even a cherry to make jam out of. I had lots of blossoms this spring, the most I've ever had. And once again, I think maybe because of the cold weather, that while they were in bloom, they didn't set a lot of fruit. I didn't even see any fruit that set and then, fell off the trees or bushes, whatever you want to call them. They're in that romance series of miniature cherry trees or large cherry bushes, however you want to look at it. Only one I can ever remember when I'm talking about them is one called Juliet, and the other two that I have also have names, but I can't think of what they are. But at least there was a lot of blooms this year, so hopefully next year with better weather and an equal amount of blooms there'll be enough cherries to make some use of them. My grafted Asian pear trees set a fair amount of fruit. They're still quite small, maybe because of all the dry weather, but also I think in the past they've done most of their growing, expanding in the late summer, early fall when we get more rain. I'm not sure which ones of the 5 that are on this tree that got pollinated this year. I know there were a couple of the grafts that didn't set any blossoms at all, but I've never had one yet that I would call the same size that you see in a supermarket for an Asian pear. Probably only about half that size, I guess. And I've been saying that might be because the tree is quite young and not that large. So hopefully I'll get a few more to eat there. Even though they're not that big, they're crisp and juicy and very nice. This is my lettuce growing in window boxes, trough type things. I didn't think it was going to make it. They were out here in the cold weather, and for the longest time they just sort of sat there. And I kept thinking, well, it's the end of them. All of a sudden they recovered and took over. The variety I think is called Little Pearl Gem or something like that. It's a miniature cos or romaine type lettuce. Not exactly like romaine, it won't make up that kind of a hit or anything, but it's that type of a lettuce. One plant is supposed to be enough for a couple of salads according to the seed package, so I guess mine aren't full grown yet, but I haven't had any. I pinch a leaf off every once in a while. The places where you see some blank spots there are plants that just didn't make it. But so far so good with my lettuce crop. These are my potatoes growing in straw. I just planted them on the surface of the ground and covered them with straw. It was a raised bed of sorts a year or so ago, just made up of the soil, the potting mix that I use in containers and whatever. I just raked that off into a thin layer everywhere and put my Linzer Delicatas seedlings on top, and I've been trying to keep covering them up a bit more all the time with more straw. I'm scared that if they are forming potatoes down there that they'll burn. I think just about everything that I planted come up. I didn't count the number of seed potatoes that I put in. I think it was a 2 kilogram bag. What's that? 4.4 pounds of Linzer Delicatas seedlings, and I didn't cut them up. I put them in whole. And there's 1 or 2 Cara in there somewhere I had left over with long stems on them growing in the basement. I put them in there as well. But I'm not going to harvest any yet. I mean, I'm very curious to see what's down there, but I'm going to wait until mid-August. I have company coming in mid-August, and I'll pull the first of them then and see if there's anything down there worth eating. But so far they're looking very good. There hasn't been any flowers or anything. And as I say, I keep topping up the straw, so I think I keep calling that hay as well, but it's straw. So I suppose I'm covering the lower parts of the plant as I do that, but I'm just concerned that they'll all turn green if the sunlight gets down through them. Something I meant to say about the potatoes, I have no idea what's going on below the straw, but the straw has certainly made it so it's, well, not completely weed-free, but very few weeds. And I've watered it once. Angel's in the picture there. She wants you to know she's still around. And I'm not so certain that it needed watering the time that I did it. I checked it last evening thinking I might water it again. And by the time I got down to ground level down in the hay, it's just as wet as can be. So it really retains moisture quite nicely. Hopefully not too much moisture. I don't see any signs of blight or anything. So fingers crossed that I will have some wonderful Linzer's Delicatas soon. This is one of the house tomatoes that I grow in the house all winter and enjoy the tiny little cherry tomatoes off it. First time I've grown one outside, and I must say the foliage is much healthier when you grow it outside. Lovely dark green. Lots of blossoms, as you can see. And it has set a few small tomatoes. I'm sure there will be more. I don't take anything back in the house after the season. If it's been outside, it stays outside. So in order to save one to plant inside, I'll just take a small tomato and plant the seeds from it. Very hot in the hoop house, but I'm going to go in. There's a few things that I want to show you, but I thought I'd give you this overview first. I think you can probably see the tops. Yeah, see the tops of these tomato plants here. Those are the Italian heritage San Marzano tomato. I'm quite sure that they're indeterminate, and I guess they probably will eventually get to the roof, but they seem to be growing slower than other indeterminates that I've had in the past, but I can see the markings of where the last two supports that I put on, and they've grown, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches in that time, 10 days or so, so they're still coming up. Let's go and look and see what the plants have got on them. This is one of the Sachas Alte, a determinate variety of tomato. Large cluster there. There's some in behind that you probably aren't showing up in the shot. And I only have 4 of these plants in here. That's, of course, I'm showing you the best. But they all have a pretty good fruit set on them. Nothing threatening to turn red yet, though. And this is one of the San Marzano. Most of them have clusters on them. That particular plant, I see another cluster down below. I forget the exact name that was on the seed packet, but it's the traditional San Marzano. And then a third word, which someone translated for me and said that they're pear-shaped. Well, I want to see that man's pear tree, whoever it was that named them. I fail to see the pear-shaped part yet, but they're supposed to be quite a large sauce tomato, Italian sauce tomato. I like that type of tomato anyway. They're not as juicy. I don't like a watery tomato, so I like them in sandwiches and everything else, but they'll also make an excellent sauce, or they're good for canning. So I have 10 plants. I suspect they're going to be later than anything else because they are an indeterminate variety, but looking forward to a harvest of them anyway. This is Beaver Lodge, another determinate variety, the third of the 3 kinds that I'm growing. And all 4 plants, again I only have 4 plants of these, are doing the same thing. They're covered in clusters of these, well, they call it a slicer, but they're 2 or 3 inch across. They're not huge tomatoes. The larger ones are 2 or 3 inches across, the smaller ones are less, of course. And it's got lots of blossoms. Well, because it's a determinate, I'm not pruning anything off of it, so all of the sucker growth comes out and blooms. They're supposed to be about the earliest as far as ripening, so I'm hoping to see something in the next couple of weeks or so. My long row of beets in here are doing very well. I have to water them daily because they don't have any straw around them. They are bulbing up quite nicely after I thinned them out. And if you can see the one strange looking thing standing up in the middle, that is a Cape gooseberry or a ground cherry, whatever you want to call it. I haven't planted those things in at least 6 years, and they pop up all over my property every year. I'm leaving that one there. I do like the taste of them, so I'll have a few to try when I'm out here in the greenhouse. You can hear me a nod above the noise the fan's making. I'm down in the end of the hoop house where the fan hauls the humid air out through a vent. I had a rodent of some sort store some sunflower seeds in here, probably last fall or during the winter from my bird feeders. I had a clump of sunflowers come up. There are now 2 of them in bloom. One of them's laying on the ground, but that one is still standing up. I think it's the commercial, like out in Saskatchewan and places, you see acreages of them growing. They're grown for sunflower oil. They don't grow terribly tall, not like the giant varieties, but nevertheless, it's kind of pretty in here. Most of my pepper plants really aren't doing all that well. That's an Espelette, and it's probably doing better than most. I do see another variety that has some decent sized peppers on it, but I really think that cold spell also didn't do them any favors. The early ones that got pollinated are developing, but I don't see a lot of new growth and new blossoms coming on for a later crop or anything. But I'll show you one more variety. I think it's Doe Hill. This one is Doe Hill, and I do see some new blossoms starting to come out on it, so there is hope here anyway. I'm not certain how large they're supposed to get, but I would say this one has probably reached its maximum size, and the one down below is sort of turning color a bit. So that's not a bad plant, but most of them just aren't performing very well. Well, I hope you can see some grapes there. I'm almost standing on my head trying to get this shot. Not large clusters of grapes, but there are lots of them on the vine, so this crazy method that I'm using of just keeping it pruned back and cutting everything back to the one main stem earlier in the spring seems to be working okay. I don't do much with them anyway, but it's just one plant. There isn't enough to do anything much with, but I do eat some of them. They're full of seeds. Variety is called Beta, which is a slipskin variety similar to the Concord grape. The few herbs that I got in from Richter's earlier in the spring are doing quite nicely in here. That's the Moroccan mint, and next to it is Angelica, and you can just barely see peeking out from behind the Angelica is the sorrel, and then there's the species variety of digitalis, foxglove, which I've grown from seed this year, so even if it's biannual or perennial, it's not going to bloom until next year. That's up next to those flowering pansies there. Several of the European gherkins have really started to grow and are producing. I've had 3 or 4 that I let grow to as large as a gherkin probably gets. I guess they were 4 inches long or so and quite fat, but I was scared if I let them go any further that it might discourage more blossoms from coming on them. I don't have enough yet to start pickling, but the plants are looking healthy, so I'm thinking in another few weeks they'll produce enough that I'll be able to make my dill pickles. These are my summer squash, crookneck yellow squash, variety Delta, I think is the name of it. 4 plants in that 4-foot square area. Gigantic leaves and gigantic plants, and they're starting to produce. I should have taken a before and after to show you. A couple of hours ago the sun was on them and we thought they were gonna die. They just collapse in the heat of the sun, even though they've been watered every day. And as soon as the sun goes off of them, it's later in the afternoon here now. It's, what time is it? It's almost 5 o'clock. And they perk right back up again. I'll give you a look at one of the squash. Like most of the summer squash, they grow very quickly. That largest one is the first one to get pollinated, and I'm not certain, but not over a week ago. I do check most mornings, and I hand pollinate if I can find a male blossom to go along with the female one, and I've been lucky so far, so anxious to give that a try, and I don't think I'll let it grow too much bigger. I like these things when they're younger and more tender. This is I guess it's a half a dozen broccoli plants in that round fabric raised bed that I started earlier this year. The bamboo sticks that you see here, there, and everywhere is because they were flopped over in a windstorm we had a couple of days ago, but none of them broke off, so they're okay. And just starting to form heads on them now, so good timing there. When my company arrives in a couple of weeks, I should have fresh broccoli. That's probably the largest of them. Each plant seems to have a little head starting, and that's, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 inches across, so just barely getting started. This is a double row of beans in a long, narrow row here, probably 2 feet wide and, I don't know, 12 feet long anyway. One row is yellow string beans and the other row is green. And I can't remember which one was supposed to be the one to get ready first, one that was an earlier variety. I think it might be the green ones, but you can see a few blossoms there. Both rows are starting to bloom, so within a week or 2 I should have some nice tender beans to pick. I have to show you this clematis vine that's growing up in my red flowering horse chestnut tree. Jagmanii, one of the hardiest of the clematis vines. I don't know how many years it's been there, but it just seems to get higher in the tree every year. And it is next to a row of my turnips, rutabagas, whichever you prefer to call them. Here, or a swede. Here, a rutabaga or a swede is called a turnip, not those little white things with the purple tops that they sell as a turnip, actually a turnip. And they are small. They are seedlings that I set out about a week ago, not much more than a week ago, and they were much tinier than that. They've really started to grow quite nicely in there. Last year I planted these things way too early, and I ended up with turnips that weighed 10 pounds and more, which is ridiculous. They were just as good as if they were small, but what do you do with a 10-pound turnip? I like to keep them in. You're supposed to keep them in until they've had some heavy frost in the fall. So these went in earlier in July, about, I don't know, a week, maybe 10 days ago, not much more than that. So hopefully they'll grow through August and September and be a more reasonable sized rutabaga when it comes time to pull them out after we've had some hard frost in October, more than likely. The black currants are ready to pick, and it is a bumper crop. I have two varieties, and I don't know the name of either one, but this is the one that I prefer. It started with one, and I propagated it, and I now have two of those. Huge berries. The other one produces practically as much fruit, the other kind. I've got 5 bushes altogether. But these are so huge, it doesn't take any time at all to fill your basket with those. I'll show you what I get when I finish. I didn't really time myself. I don't know how long that took, but I don't think any more than an hour. And that's my picnic basket, almost completely full. I filled this small bamboo basket 5 times. They're fun to pick. They come off in big clusters, and it's not bad at all picking them. The hard job comes now when I have to sit down and pick over that entire basket to get rid of the little twigs that they were fastened to, and the leaves, and some berries in there that are too green, and all that good stuff. That usually takes 2 or 3 hours. I do it watching television or something. I'm looking forward to making my black currant jam again. I'm on my last bottle, about a quarter of a bottle left, so I've managed to stretch it out so that till the new is ready to eat, I think. Well, thank you very much for watching. That will conclude this little update on the garden.